The sound of gunfire crackled through the dusty air of Camp Verde, Arizona territory. But it wasn't outlaws or Apache raiders this time, just the beginning of another Saturday night at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Harriet Porter gripped the broom handle tighter as she swept the wooden porch of her late husband's general store, watching the sunset paint the Mogollon Rim in shades of amber and blood. 3 months a widow, and the sound of revelry still made her heart ache with loneliness. The year was 1878, and Camp Verde had grown from a mere military outpost to a proper settlement, though proper might be stretching the truth on Saturday nights. The cavalry fort still stood, protecting the settlers from occasional raids, but these days the town was more concerned with copper mining, cattle, and commerce than constant danger. Harriet tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, watching as cowboys fresh from the range dismounted at the hitching posts across the dusty street. Their laughter carried on the evening breeze, carefree in ways she could scarcely remember feeling. At 26, she shouldn't feel this hollow, this worn. James had been dead less than a season, consumption taking him quickly and cruelly, leaving her with a store to run and memories that haunted every corner of their small home behind the shop. "Evening, Mrs. Porter." She startled at the voice, turning to find Sheriff Davis tipping his hat as he passed by on his evening rounds. "Evening, Sheriff," she replied, forcing a smile. "Looks to be a lively night at the Silver Dollar." The older man nodded, his mustache twitching. "New trail boss brought his men in today. Delivered 500 head to the railroad. They'll be celebrating their pay, no doubt." He glanced at her broom. "You're keeping late hours at the store." "Just tidying up. I'll be heading in shortly. Alone." Again. The word hung unspoken between them. "Well, good night then, madam." The sheriff continued his patrol, boots thumping rhythmically on the boardwalk. Harriet sighed, giving the porch one final sweep before retreating inside. The store smelled of coffee, leather, and the faint sweetness of candy jars. She locked the door, sliding the bolt into place with a satisfying thunk, then made her way through the shadowy interior toward the back room that connected to her living quarters. A floorboard creaked beneath her feet, the same loose board James had always promised to fix. Another task left undone, another reminder. She paused at the doorway, her gaze catching on the small piano in the corner of her parlor. James had surprised her with it on their first anniversary, hauled all the way from Denver at considerable expense. He'd loved to hear her play in the evenings. She hadn't touched the keys since the day he died. The knock at her back door startled her from her reverie. Visitors rarely came this way. It was mostly for deliveries. Cautious, Harriet picked up the small derringer James had insisted she keep nearby and approached the door. "Who is it?" She called, keeping her voice steady. "Mrs. Porter, it's Nathan Ashwood. I've got your supplies from Prescott." She frowned, tucking the derringer into her pocket. "Mr. Ashwood, it's rather late for deliveries, isn't it?" "Yes, madam," came the reply, the voice deep and apologetic. "Had trouble with a wheel about 10 miles out. Took longer than expected to fix. I can come back tomorrow if it's inconvenient." Harriet hesitated. She knew Nathan Ashwood by reputation, a former Texas Ranger turned freight hauler who made regular runs between Prescott and the smaller settlements. He'd taken over the route after old Mr. Simmons retired, but this was his first delivery to her store. James had always handled the supply orders. "One moment," she said, lighting a lamp before unbolting the door. The man who stood in the golden circle of lamplight was taller than she'd expected, his broad shoulders nearly filling the doorframe. Dust covered his clothing, and a dark hat was pushed back on his head, revealing a weathered face with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His nose looked as though it had been broken at least once, and a thin scar traced the edge of his jaw, but there was something compelling about his features. "Mrs. Porter," he said, removing his hat. "Sorry for the late hour." "It's quite all right," she found herself saying. "You've come all this way. I wouldn't send you back to town without unloading." Relief flickered across his face. "Much obliged. I've got flour, sugar, coffee, and those fabrics you ordered. Some ammunition, too." She stepped aside. "The storeroom's through here. I'll help you bring it in." "That won't be necessary, madam." His voice was firm but gentle. "I can manage, Mr. Ashwood," Harriet said with more spirit than she'd felt in weeks. "I've been running this store alone for 3 months now. I'm perfectly capable of carrying supplies." Something like respect flashed in his eyes. "Yes, madam." For the next half hour they worked together unloading the wagon. Nathan carried the heavier items, flour barrels and ammunition crates, while Harriet handled the bolts of fabric and smaller parcels. They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by occasional instructions about where to place things. When they finished, Harriet offered him coffee, surprised at herself even as she spoke the words. The sun had fully set, and propriety dictated that a widow shouldn't entertain a man alone in her home after dark. But something about Nathan Ashwood's quiet, respectful manner put her at ease. "Thank you," he said, "but I should get back to town, find myself a room for the night." "The hotel will be full," she said. "With those cowboys in town," he nodded. "I'll manage. Maybe the livery has some space." Harriet hesitated, then made a decision that would have scandalized her mother back in Boston. "There's a small room above the stable out back. My husband used it as an office sometimes. There's a cot. You're welcome to stay there tonight as payment for making the delivery so late." Nathan studied her face, as if trying to determine her motives. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded. "That's kind of you, Mrs. Porter. I accept. I'll show you the way." She led him through the back garden to the small stable where she kept a mare and cart for local deliveries. The upstairs room was dusty but clean enough, with a narrow cot and a small desk. "It's not much," she apologized. "It's fine," he assured her. "I've slept in far worse places." Something in his tone suggested those places had been during darker times, but Harriet didn't pry. "There's a pump in the yard for water. I'll leave you to get settled." As she turned to go, he said, "Mrs. Porter," she paused. "Yes, thank you for your kindness." Not everyone would take a chance on a stranger. Harriet studied him in the lamplight. "You delivered my goods safely and helped stock my shelves. That makes you a business associate, Mr. Ashwood, not a stranger." The smile that briefly touched his lips transformed his face, softening the hard angles and lighting his eyes. "Good night, then, Mrs. Porter." "Good night, Mr. Ashwood." Harriet returned to her house, surprised to find her heart beating a little faster than usual. It had been a long time since she'd had a conversation with anyone that wasn't strictly about business or filled with pitying glances. Nathan Ashwood had treated her with respect but not condescension, and had accepted her help without making her feel weak or foolish. It was refreshing, she decided. Nothing more. Morning arrived with the scent of coffee drifting through the air. Harriet opened her eyes, momentarily confused by the aroma. Since James's death, there had been no one to make coffee before she awoke. She dressed quickly in a simple blue calico dress and made her way to the kitchen, where she found a pot of coffee simmering on the stove and Nathan Ashwood feeding kindling into the firebox. He straightened when he saw her, looking almost embarrassed. "Hope you don't mind." "Thought I'd repay your hospitality." "Not at all," she said, surprised at how natural it felt to find him in her kitchen, "though you didn't need to. Force of habit. Can't start the day without coffee." He poured a cup and offered it to her. "Might be stronger than you're used to." Harriet accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. The coffee was indeed strong but good. "Perfect," she declared after a sip. "Thank you." "I'll be heading out soon," he said, pouring a cup for himself. "Got deliveries in Jerome next." Harriet nodded, ignoring the twinge of disappointment she felt. "When will you be back through Camp Verde?" 2 weeks, give or take. Depends on the weather up in the mountains." She hesitated, then asked, "Would you be willing to bring some special orders for me next time?" "Things I can't get from the usual suppliers." Interest sparked in his eyes. "What kind of special orders?" "Books mainly, and sheet music. The kind of things most freighters won't bother with because they don't fetch high prices." Nathan leaned against the counter, studying her over the rim of his cup. "You play piano," she admitted. "Though not recently." He nodded, not pressing for details. "I can bring whatever you need, just make a list. I'll have it ready before you leave." They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Then Harriet showed him to the store, where she prepared an inventory of items she wanted for his next visit. As she wrote, she found herself adding books and music sheets she'd been longing for but had denied herself in her grief. "This is quite a list," Nathan commented as he folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. "Is it too much?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Not at all. Just nice to meet someone with literary tastes out here." He settled his hat on his head. "Most folks only ask for dime novels and patent medicines. I was a school teacher," she explained, "before I married and moved west." Something like approval warmed his eyes. "That explains it. Well, Mrs. Porter, I'll do my best to find everything on your list." "Thank you, Mr. Ashwood." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, but paused at the door. "If there's anything else you need while I'm gone, anything at all, Sheriff Davis knows how to get word to me." The offer was practical, professional, yet Harriet felt something shift in the air between them. "I appreciate that." After he left, the store seemed unusually quiet. Harriet busied herself organizing the new inventory, but her thoughts kept drifting to Nathan Ashwood. There was something about the freight hauler that intrigued her, a sense of depth and complexity beneath his reserved exterior. He reminded her of the characters in the novels she loved, men with mysterious pasts and hidden depths. She shook her head at her own fanciful thoughts. She was a widow, still mourning. He was just a kind man who'd made her coffee. Nothing more. The next 2 weeks passed slowly. Harriet fell into her routine, opening the store at dawn, serving customers throughout the day, closing at sunset, then spending quiet evenings alone with her memories and the occasional book. But now there was a subtle difference, a sense of anticipation that grew as Nathan's expected return date approached. When the bell above the store door jangled late one afternoon, Harriet looked up from the ledger she was updating to find Nathan standing there, hat in hand, looking trail-worn but pleased. "Mr. Ashwood," she said, unable to keep the smile from her voice. "You made good time." "Roads were dry," he replied, approaching the counter, "and I had incentive to hurry." From his saddlebags, he produced several packages wrapped in brown paper. "Your special orders, Mrs. Porter." Harriet unwrapped them with growing delight. 3 novels she'd requested, sheet music for pieces she'd been wanting to play, and even a small box of fine teas from San Francisco that hadn't been on her list. "The tea is a liberty I took," he explained when she raised a questioning eyebrow. "Met a merchant in Prescott who just received a shipment. Thought you might enjoy something different." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. "That was very kind, Mr. Ashwood. How much do I owe you for everything?" He named a fair price, not including the tea. When she tried to pay for it separately, he shook his head. "Consider it a thank you for the room above your stable. Speaking of which," he hesitated, "I was hoping I might impose on your hospitality again tonight. The hotel's full with a mining company delegation." Of course, Harriet said, perhaps too quickly. The room is yours whenever you need it. Relief crossed his features. Much obliged. I won't disturb you this evening. Need to check on some business at the Silver Dollar. Business at a saloon? She asked, unable to mask her curiosity. A shadow crossed his face. Not the kind you're thinking. I'm looking for someone. Someone dangerous. His expression softened slightly. No, madam, just a man who owes money to a friend in Prescott. Nothing that should worry you. But something in his tone made Harriet wonder if there was more to the story. She didn't press, however, merely nodded. Well, good luck with your business. The stable room is ready whenever you need it. Thank you. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, almost forgot. From his pocket, he produced a small package. One more item you might like. Harriet unwrapped it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with an intricate pattern of desert flowers. Saw it in a shop in Prescott, Nathan explained, looking almost shy. Thought it matched your spirit somehow. Before she could respond, the bell jangled again and a customer entered. Nathan tipped his hat and slipped out, leaving Harriet holding the journal and feeling more confused than ever. That night, after closing the store, she sat at her piano for the first time since James's death. Her fingers were stiff at first, stumbling over the keys, but gradually the music returned. She played softly, a melancholy piece that matched her mood, thinking of James and the life they'd shared, but also of Nathan and the unexpected warmth his visits brought to her days. When the last notes faded, she became aware of a presence. Nathan stood in the doorway connecting the store to her home, hat in hand. I apologize for intruding, he said quickly. I heard the music. It was beautiful. Harriet should have been embarrassed or even scandalized to be caught in such a private moment, but instead she felt only a curious calm. It's all right, I haven't played in some time. Since your husband passed, he asked gently. She nodded. How did you know? People talk. I make it my business to listen. He shifted slightly. I lost my wife 5 years ago. Childbirth, lost the baby too. The admission, so simply stated yet clearly still painful, created a bridge between them. I'm sorry, Harriet said softly, as am I for your loss. He cleared his throat. I should let you rest, just wanted to say the music was lovely. Would you like to hear more? The invitation surprised her as much as him. I'm out of practice, but... A smile touched his lips. I'd be honored. She gestured to the chair near the piano and he sat, placing his hat on his knee. Harriet turned back to the keys, feeling strangely nervous yet excited. She chose a piece from the new sheet music he'd brought, something hopeful and bright. As she played, she was acutely aware of Nathan watching her, his gray eyes intent and appreciative. When she finished, he applauded softly. That was wonderful, he said. My Caroline used to sing but never played an instrument, said her fingers were too stubborn to learn. The mention of his wife didn't feel like a barrier between them, but rather another connection, two people who understood loss. What was she like? Harriet asked. Nathan's expression softened with memory. Fierce, determined, could outride most men and outsmart all of them, he chuckled. She was a rancher's daughter from the Texas Panhandle, never let anything stand in her way. She sounds remarkable. She was. He looked at Harriet directly. Your husband, what was he like? Harriet's fingers traced the wood grain of the piano. Kind, thoughtful, a dreamer, really. He always had plans for the future. The store was just the beginning. He wanted to build a real emporium someday with a second floor and glass windows from St. Louis. She smiled sadly. He loved this town, believed it would grow into something special. And you, did you share his dream? The question caught her off guard. She paused, considering. I wanted what made him happy, but I miss teaching sometimes. The children, the books. Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Dreams change. After Caroline, I couldn't stand the ranch anymore. Too many memories. That's how I ended up hauling freight. They talked well into the evening, sharing stories of their pasts, careful to keep the conversation light when it touched on painful subjects. Harriet learned that Nathan had been a Texas Ranger for 3 years before marrying Caroline and settling on her father's ranch. After losing his family, he drifted west, eventually finding purpose in his current profession. "It suits me," he explained. "Always moving, seeing new places, meeting people without having to put down roots. Don't you ever get lonely?" Harriet asked, then immediately regretted the personal question, but Nathan didn't seem offended. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it's a different kind of lonely than staying in one place surrounded by ghosts." The words resonated with Harriet more than she wanted to admit. When she finally showed him out, there was a new understanding between them, a friendship born of shared experiences and mutual respect. "I'll be back through town in about 10 days, Nathan said as he prepared to leave the next morning. "Any special requests for your next order?" Harriet handed him a list she'd prepared, shorter than before but including a few personal items. "Nothing urgent, just whenever you can." He folded the paper carefully and tucked it away. "I'll find everything," he promised. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Nathan would arrive with her orders, stay in the room above her stable, and they would spend evenings talking or simply enjoying each other's company while Harriet played the piano. Sometimes he would read while she worked on store accounts. Other times they would walk through town in the cool evening air, exchanging observations about the residents and changes in Camp Verde. The town noticed, of course. Harriet caught the speculative glances, heard the whispers that sometimes fell silent when she entered the post office or church. Some, like Sheriff Davis, seemed approving of the friendship. Others, particularly the older widows who had appointed themselves guardians of propriety, were clearly scandalized that Harriet was entertaining a man so soon after her husband's death. "Does it bother you?" Nathan asked one evening as they walked past Mrs. Hollister, who had pointedly looked away when they greeted her. "The gossip," Harriet considered the question. "Less than I thought it would," she admitted. "James has been gone nearly 6 months now. I've mourned him properly. And we're just friends." Something flickered in Nathan's eyes, disappointment. Relief. She couldn't tell. "Just friends," he agreed, though his tone held a question. That night, Harriet wrote in the journal Nathan had given her, confronting feelings she'd been avoiding. She was attracted to him, his strength, his quiet competence, the respect with which he treated her. But was it too soon? Was she betraying James's memory? The answer came to her as she stared at the last entry in her ledger, the final inventory James had recorded before falling ill. He had always looked forward, planned for the future. Would he want her to deny herself happiness out of some misplaced sense of loyalty? Nathan returned from his next run with another surprise: seeds for desert wildflowers to plant around her house. "Saw them in a catalog," he explained almost sheepishly. "Thought they might brighten things up come spring." Harriet impulsively squeezed his hand. "They're perfect, thank you." The touch lingered, neither pulling away immediately. When their eyes met, Harriet saw her own confusion and longing reflected in Nathan's gaze. "Harriet," he said softly, the first time he'd used her given name, "I should tell you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes, the man I was looking for at the Silver Dollar that night. He wasn't just someone who owed money." Nathan's expression turned grim. "He was part of the gang that ambushed a stagecoach outside of Tucson last year. 3 people died, including a woman and child." Harriet frowned, unsure why he was telling her this now. "Did you find him?" Nathan nodded. "He was passing through. Sheriff Davis arrested him based on my information. He's standing trial in Prescott now." Understanding dawned. "You were a lawman again." "Old habits," He hesitated. The thing is, I've been offered a position as a deputy marshal. Based in Prescott, but covering the territory. Oh, the word came out small, hollow. You're leaving? I haven't accepted yet. His eyes searched hers. I wanted to talk to you first. Why? She already knew the answer, but needed to hear him say it. Because in the last few months, you've become important to me. More than important. He took a deep breath. I care for you, Harriet, more than I thought I could care for anyone again. The confession hung between them, changing everything and nothing at once. Harriet's heart raced as she admitted, I care for you too, Nathan, but I don't know if I'm ready. I understand, he said quickly, and I don't want to rush you, but I need to make a decision about the marshal's position soon. When do you need to tell them? After my next run. 2 weeks. She nodded slowly. Then we have time to think. For the next 2 weeks, their relationship existed in a strange limbo. They continued their evening conversations, but now there was an undercurrent of tension, of words unsaid and decisions pending. Nathan never pressed her for an answer, never demanded she make a choice, but the question hovered between them nonetheless. The night before he was due to leave for what might be his last run as a freight hauler, Nathan invited Harriet to dinner at the hotel restaurant, their first public outing that couldn't be mistaken for anything but courtship. She accepted, wearing her best dress, a deep green that brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. They drew stares as they entered the hotel dining room, but Harriet found she didn't care. Nathan was handsome in a clean shirt and vest, his usually wind-tousled hair neatly combed, and the pride in his eyes when he looked at her made her feel beautiful in a way she hadn't in years. You look lovely, he said as he held her chair. Thank you. She smoothed her skirt nervously. It feels strange to be out like this. Good strange or bad strange, she smiled. Good strange. The meal was pleasant, the food better than Harriet had expected. They talked of neutral topics, the changing weather, news from back east, the territorial governor's recent visit to Prescott. Only when dessert was served did Nathan broach the subject they'd been avoiding. I leave tomorrow, he said, his voice low. I need to give Marshal Jenkins my answer when I reach Prescott. Harriet set down her fork. And what will your answer be? Nathan met her gaze directly. That depends on what I have to come back to. The simple statement laid bare his feelings and his question. Harriet took a deep breath. Nathan, these past months have been. I've felt alive again because of you. She twisted her napkin in her lap. But the thought of starting over, of risking my heart again, it frightens me. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. It frightens me too. I never thought I'd feel this way again after Caroline. Never wanted to. Then why now? Why me? His smile was gentle. Because some things are worth the risk. She turned her hand beneath his, their palms meeting. If you take the marshal's position, you'd be based in Prescott, he nodded. But I'd be here often. The territory's growing, needs more lawmen, and Camp Verde is on my route. I have the store, she said, thinking aloud. I couldn't leave it. James built it from nothing. I wouldn't ask you to. He squeezed her hand. We could find a way to make it work, if that's what you want. Harriet looked into his eyes, seeing the future there, a second chance at happiness for both of them. But she also saw the dangers of his chosen profession, the risk of losing someone she loved again. I need time, she said finally. Can you give me that? Disappointment flickered across his features, but he nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. The rest of the evening passed in subdued conversation. When Nathan walked her home, he kept a respectful distance, though Harriet found herself wishing he would take her hand again. At her door, he said, I'll be back in 10 days, regardless of my decision. I'll deliver your supplies as promised. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, Nathan, whatever you decide about the marshal's position, I'm glad to have known you. He studied her face in the lamplight, as if memorizing her features. "Good night, Harriet. Good night." After he left, Harriet sat at her piano but couldn't bring herself to play. Instead, she opened the journal he'd given her and wrote until the lamp burned low, pouring out her fears and hopes and the growing certainty that she was falling in love with Nathan Ashwood. The next morning, she watched from her store window as he loaded his wagon and departed, not trusting herself to say goodbye in person. As the dust from his wagon faded on the horizon, Harriet felt a hollowness in her chest that no amount of busy work could fill. 3 days later, a letter arrived from her sister in Boston, full of news and gossip, but containing one piece of information that made Harriet's blood run cold. There had been an outbreak of influenza, and several families had lost children, including her niece. The grief was immediate and overwhelming, not just for her niece, whom she'd never met, but for all the losses that seemed to define her life. That night, she dragged out James's trunk from beneath their bed and sorted through his belongings, finally confronting the task she'd avoided for months. Among his things, she found letters she'd written him during their courtship, a small portrait of herself that he'd carried, and a letter addressed to her in his handwriting, dated just days before his death. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. "My dearest Harriet," the letter began, "if you're reading this, I've left you alone in this world, and for that, I'm truly sorry. I know you're stronger than you believe, but I worry for you nonetheless. Not for your ability to survive, but for your willingness to live." Tears blurred her vision as she continued reading. "You have so much love to give, my darling. Don't bury it with me. When the time comes, when you find someone worthy of your heart, don't let fear or misplaced loyalty hold you back. I want you to be happy, to love and be loved. That's all I've ever wanted for you." The letter continued, full of practical advice about the store and their finances, but it was those first paragraphs that Harriet read over and over, hearing James's voice in the words, feeling his permission, his blessing to move forward. The days passed slowly as Harriet waited for Nathan's return, alternating between certainty and doubt about what she would say to him. She reorganized the store, planted the wildflower seeds he'd brought her, and played the piano each evening, finding solace in the music and memories. On the 10th day, she watched the road anxiously, but Nathan didn't appear, nor did he come the 11th day or the 12th. By the 14th day, Harriet was sick with worry. Had something happened on the trail? Had he decided to take the marshal's position and cut ties with Camp Verde entirely? She was closing the store when Sheriff Davis appeared at her door. "Mrs. Porter," he said, removing his hat. "Got a telegram from Prescott you should see." Her heart sank as she took the paper. Had Nathan sent word that he wasn't returning? But the telegram wasn't from Nathan. It was from Marshal Jenkins himself. "Nathan Ashwood injured, stop Apache attack near Jerome, stop recovering at Territorial Hospital, stop asking for you, stop." Harriet's hand flew to her mouth. "How badly is he hurt?" "Telegram doesn't say," the sheriff replied. "But if he's at the hospital and conscious enough to ask for you, that's a good sign. I need to go to him." The decision was immediate, instinctive. "Stage leaves at dawn," Sheriff Davis said. "I took the liberty of reserving you a seat." Gratitude washed over her. "Thank you, Sheriff." "He's a good man, Mrs. Porter, one of the best I've known." The older man shifted uncomfortably. "Some folks in town might not approve of your friendship coming so soon after Mr. Porter's passing, but I knew James. He'd want you to be happy." Tears pricked at Harriet's eyes. "That's what he told me in a letter I found just last week." The sheriff nodded. "Smart man, your husband." He replaced his hat. "I'll have Deputy Wilson keep an eye on your store while you're gone. Don't you worry about anything here." Harriet packed quickly, taking only necessities and the journal Nathan had given her. She barely slept that night, her mind filled with terrible scenarios of what might have happened to Nathan and how severely he might be injured. The journey to Prescott took a full day, the stagecoach bouncing over rough terrain and stopping frequently to change horses. By the time they arrived, it was early evening and Harriet was exhausted but determined. She hired a carriage to take her directly to the Territorial Hospital, a new brick building on the outskirts of town. The nurse at the reception desk looked skeptical when Harriet asked for Nathan. "Are you family, madam?" "No, but I'm sorry, only family are permitted to visit patients at this hour." Harriet was preparing to argue when a deep voice interrupted. "Mrs. Porter." She turned to find a tall man in a marshal's uniform approaching. "Yes, I'm Marshal Jenkins. Nathan's told me about you." He offered his hand. "He'll be mighty glad to see you." "How is he?" Harriet asked anxiously. "Better today. Took an arrow in the shoulder and a bad fall from his horse. Lost some blood, but the doctor says he'll recover fully with time and rest." The marshal gestured for her to follow him. "Not that he's doing much resting. Been trying to get out of bed since they brought him in." Relief made Harriet's knees weak. "That sounds like him." The marshal led her down a corridor to a small private room. "He's in here. I'll leave you two alone." Harriet paused outside the door, suddenly nervous. What if Nathan's feelings had changed during their separation? What if the injury had made him reconsider his future? Taking a deep breath, she knocked softly and entered. Nathan was propped up in bed, his left shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale but alert. When he saw her, his eyes widened in disbelief and joy. "Harriet," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You came." She moved to his bedside, fighting the urge to throw her arms around him. "Of course I came, when the sheriff showed me the telegram." Her voice broke. "I was so afraid." Nathan reached for her hand with his uninjured arm, his grip fierce. "I'm all right, just a scratch." "A scratch that put you in the hospital," she chided, but she couldn't keep the smile from her face. He was alive, nothing else mattered. "I'm sorry I couldn't send word myself," he said. "Was unconscious the first day, then they wouldn't let me out of bed to send a telegram." "What happened?" She pulled a chair close to his bedside, still holding his hand. Nathan's expression darkened. "Rogue band of Apaches, not from the reservation. They've been raiding isolated homesteads. I stumbled across them on the trail to Jerome," he grimaced. "They got the drop on me. I was careless. You're lucky to be alive." "I know." His eyes held hers. "All I could think about when I was lying there bleeding was that I might never see you again, never get to tell you." Harriet's heart pounded. "Tell me what?" "That I love you." The words were simple, direct, like the man himself. "I think I have since that first night when you offered me a place to stay and treated me like a person, not just a freight hauler." Tears filled Harriet's eyes. "Oh, Nathan, I love you too." The admission felt like stepping into sunlight after months in shadow. "I was so afraid to say it, afraid of losing someone again. But these past 2 weeks, not knowing where you were, if you were safe, I realized that not loving you out of fear would be the greatest loss of all." Nathan's face transformed with joy. He tugged her hand, pulling her gently closer until she perched on the edge of his bed. With his good arm, he reached up to touch her cheek. "I never thought I'd find love again. Never thought I deserved it after failing to protect Caroline." "You didn't fail," Harriet said fiercely. "Some things are beyond our control. I understand that now," he nodded slowly. "What happens next is within our control, though." "Yes," she agreed. "Did you accept the marshal's position?" A shadow crossed his face. "I did. Before this happened." He gestured to his injured shoulder. "Not the best start to a new career. Marshal Jenkins seems to think you'll recover fully. The doctor says the same. 6 weeks, maybe 8, before I can use this arm properly." His expression turned anxious. "Harriet, being a marshal's wife, it won't be easy. There will be times I'm away for weeks, chasing fugitives or escorting prisoners. And there's always danger." She placed a finger on his lips. "I know, and I'm choosing it anyway, choosing you." The look he gave her was worth all the worry and fear of the past weeks. "Does that mean you'll marry me, Harriet Porter?" she laughed, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "Is that your proposal, Nathan Ashwood, in a hospital bed with an arrow wound?" His smile was sheepish. "Not very romantic, is it? I had better plans before this happened." "It's perfect," she assured him, leaning down to press a gentle kiss to his lips. "And yes, I'll marry you." They were married 4 weeks later in the small church in Camp Verde, with Sheriff Davis giving away the bride and Marshal Jenkins serving as best man. Nathan's shoulder was still healing, but he stood straight and proud as he recited his vows, his voice steady and sure. Harriet wore a new dress of deep blue silk, ordered specially from San Francisco, and carried a bouquet of the desert wildflowers that had bloomed from the seeds Nathan had given her. As she walked down the aisle toward him, she felt James's approval like a gentle breeze at her back, pushing her toward her future. The reception was held in the Silver Dollar Saloon, cleared of its usual rowdy customers for the occasion. When the small band began to play, Nathan drew Harriet aside. "There's something you should know about me," he said, a hint of embarrassment in his voice. "I don't dance, never learned how." Harriet smiled, understanding his discomfort. "That's all right, we don't have to dance. But it's our wedding. You should have at least one dance." She took his hands in hers, mindful of his injured shoulder. "Then just hold me still and call it enough." Relief and love washed over his features. "I can do that." And so, as the music played and other couples twirled around them, Nathan and Harriet stood in the center of the floor, holding each other close, swaying gently to the rhythm. It wasn't dancing, not really, but it was perfect, a moment of stillness in lives that had been marked by too much change and loss. "Happy," Nathan murmured against her hair. "Completely," she answered and meant it. They made their home in the rooms behind the general store, which Harriet continued to run while Nathan recovered from his injury. When he was well enough to return to his duties as a deputy marshal, they established a routine. He would be based in Camp Verde as much as possible, making the store his unofficial office, and would telegraph daily when his duties took him away. The arrangement wasn't always easy. Harriet worried when Nathan was on the trail of dangerous criminals, and he fretted about leaving her alone, though she proved more than capable of handling the store and defending herself when necessary. A year after their wedding, Nathan returned from a particularly long assignment to find Harriet waiting with news. They were expecting a child. The joy on his face made all the challenges of their unusual marriage worthwhile. "A baby," he said in wonder, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Are you happy, Harriet? Truly, this life isn't what you planned." She covered his hand with hers. "It's better than anything I could have planned. I have the store, my music, and now our child. And I have you whenever you can be here." "I was thinking about that," Nathan said, pulling her close. "Marshal Jenkins has offered me a promotion, chief deputy for the Southern District. It would mean more responsibility but less time on the trail. I'd supervise other deputies instead of chasing outlaws myself." Hope blossomed in Harriet's chest. "You'd be home more, much more. Prescott wants to establish a proper marshal's office here in Camp Verde to oversee the Verde Valley. I'd be based here permanently." He searched her face. "What do you think?" "I think it sounds perfect," she said, reaching up to kiss him. "For all of us." Their son, James Nathan Ashwood, was born the following spring. A healthy, robust boy with his father's storm-gray eyes and his mother's determination. By then, Nathan had established the marshal's office in a small building next to the general store, allowing him to be close to his family while fulfilling his duties. As Camp Verde grew, so did Ashwood's general store and emporium, expanding to include the second floor and glass windows from St. Louis that James Porter had dreamed of. Harriet added a small library section where she held reading classes for the town's children 3 afternoons a week, fulfilling her desire to teach again. 2 years after James was born, they welcomed a daughter, Caroline Elizabeth, completing their family. Nathan proved to be a devoted father, teaching his children to ride and shoot as they grew older, while Harriet nurtured their love of books and music. There were difficult times, droughts that threatened the area's ranches, occasional tensions with the Apache, and the constant challenges of frontier life. Nathan faced danger in his work, coming home with new scars and stories he sometimes shared and sometimes kept to himself. But through it all, their love remained constant, deepening with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Harriet with a small spinet piano for their home, allowing her to play in the evenings without going to the store. That night, after the children were asleep, he took her in his arms as she finished a piece. "Dance with me," he said. Harriet looked up in surprise. "You don't dance." A smile touched his lips. "I've been learning. Marshall Jenkins's wife has been teaching me, wanted to surprise you." And so, for the first time, they truly danced together, Nathan leading with newfound confidence, Harriet following with grace and joy. It wasn't perfect. He stepped on her toes once and apologized profusely, but it was theirs, another first in a marriage built on second chances and unexpected happiness. "I love you, Harriet Ashwood," Nathan said as the dance ended. "Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty freight hauler who showed up at your door too late one evening." "I love you too," she replied, resting her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you for giving me a reason to play music again, to live again." They stood there in the quiet of their home, holding each other still, knowing it was more than enough, it was everything. As the years passed, Camp Verde grew into a prosperous town, weathering the challenges of territorial politics and the transition to statehood when Arizona finally joined the Union in 1912. Nathan eventually retired from the Marshal Service, focusing on helping Harriet run the Emporium, which had become one of the largest in northern Arizona. Their children grew up, James following his father into law enforcement, while Caroline became a teacher with her mother's love of books and learning. Through it all, Nathan and Harriet's love remained the cornerstone of their lives, a testament to the healing power of second chances and the courage it takes to open one's heart after loss. Each evening they still held each other close, sometimes dancing, sometimes just standing still, always finding it more than enough. And on quiet nights, when the desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods and the stars blazed overhead, Harriet would sometimes play the piano, the music carrying across Camp Verde like a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, beauty and love could flourish, unexpected and enduring.